Hey guys, we're going to go inside the National Archives, which is actually one of the more modern buildings in Washington, D.C., even though it holds some of our most historical documents. Before we had this building, a lot of our precious founding documents were all sort of disorganized in different places. So this was really critical to preserving our national history. Come on. This is actually my first time in person at the National Archives. It's really, really moving to be with so many important historic documents. And I have so many questions. So I'm really excited. Tomorrow we get to come back. We're going to be able to be in this room by ourselves with a historian from the National Archives, asking some questions about what we're seeing today and why they decided to put this special exhibit together now. This is the first time that the entire Constitution has been displayed. Why now?
We weren't really able to do it before because the amendments, most of them had already been bound. And so we weren't able to display the whole thing. So if you think about like the 14th Amendment's 2 pages, you can only show 1 page. So we couldn't, and we can't sit here and like flip pages all day. So we really finally were able to get them all out of their bindings and available for display.
How hard was that to do? I didn't realize that they would be, were they bound like a book together?
Yeah, so if you look, we can look at the 11th Amendment. The original early amendments were bound at the top, which makes it almost impossible to display. So if you look at these early amendments, you can kind of even see that there's holes in it left because these are parchment, which is animal skin. So they literally sewed them into the volumes, but they're at the top. So if you think about how big this volume is, in order to like show it, we would have to flip it like up, but we don't have a case that can display it that way.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult. We don't have any cradles. So these had to be removed in order to be able to display them. And the same thing here, if you go over to the 14th Amendment, it's 2 pages and they were, it's page and page. And so it doesn't open like this, unfortunately.
Was there like one big book of the Constitution, like where everything was together, sort of like a Bible? Like how was it put together?
Not at all. So the Constitution was always housed separately with the 5th page. And that's actually, since it's come to us in 1952, it's been on a permanent display. But before it was housed just together. These amendments are all housed with the Congress that passed them. So they're in volumes, but they're not, they're like, they do them in order of when they get passed, and then when they get to like a critical mass, they stop and they create a new volume. So yeah, we just have our vault where these are normally stored, has just rows and rows of legislation in these volumes. And that's how they stored them, it's actually good for storage because once we start unbinding them, right now the volume's like this big, then it's like this big once you have all the loose papers, and we don't really have that much storage. So we couldn't like take everything out of the binding, but we're trying to take, important legislation out, or even the earlier Congresses.
And so was other things kind of mixed in with that?
It's all just legislation. So the order, when Congress passed something, they would just kind of put it in a pile. And
it didn't matter if it was an amendment to the Constitution or something else?
Yeah, so the amendments to the Constitution were all with the resolutions, yeah. So it wasn't any,
I
know it's things like I don't know if they were thinking about. Yes, they were just with the other. It could be a very mundane resolution right next to the 13th Amendment, and they weren't distinguishable from each other. Yeah, it is.
Okay, well, let's look at the original document of the U.S. Constitution. Is so amazing to see.
Well, yeah, let's start with the signature page, because there's a couple things about the Constitution that are kind of important about this exhibit. So the Constitution itself, this was written in 1787 by the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, and it's 4 pages, and it outlines the whole Constitution. So the 7 articles, Article 1, Congress, Article 2, Executive, Article 3, the courts. But what we were really focusing on for this exhibit is Article 5, which outlines the amendment process. And it says that in order to amend the Constitution, you need 2/3 of the House and the Senate to pass a joint resolution, and then you need 3/4 of the states. There's another way you can ratify it as well. You could have 2/3 of state, of like a state convention or a constitutional convention, and then 3/4 of state ratification conventions. But that method hasn't really been used.
I mean, just thinking about that at the time, it wasn't that we had 50 states. So I'm sure this idea of additions to the Constitution, what that would take. I wonder if the founders thought, maybe someday we'll have 30 states, and maybe someday we'll have 50 states. Do you think they thought that big that the way that they were setting it up could apply to more than 13 colonies?
I definitely think that they thought about more states, but they thought about amending it because almost immediately calls were, before this document even became law, states were calling for it to be amended to add individual rights. So they hadn't really incorporated any individual rights in this document, and so during the ratification conventions, states said, we're not going to ratify this unless you have a Bill of Rights. And some states ratified it with, conditionally, saying you need to add these amendments, and other states refused to ratify. So, the delegates were meeting in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787, and then they signed this document on September 17th, 1787, which we now celebrate as Constitution Day. And there's 39 delegates. And I'll just give you a little bit of, just since you're looking at this.
Yeah, no, I love that. The penmanship is so beautiful too.
Right.
It's one of the most stunning things about the document. It's amazing.
Right. So Jacob Challis was the penman for this document. It took about 40 hours to do. I mean, it probably took him like an hour just to do We the People. It's so ornate. So how it's signed is you have George Washington as president of the convention. So he's not president of the United States yet. He's president of the convention. So he signed it first, and then it goes signatures from the northernmost state, New Hampshire, down, and then back up here to Georgia, the southernmost state. And they're grouped by state delegations. So you can see, Virginia's delegations here. You have James Madison. You have Pennsylvania's delegation. You see Benjamin Franklin. So the person who wrote the state names was Alexander Hamilton. You can see that he misspelled Pennsylvania, only one N.
Do you think that was a little passive aggressive?
I don't know, if he just didn't know how to spell. I mean, but also, so New York, the other delegates from New York didn't sign. He was the only delegate from New York. So this is 39 signers. They're wrapping up the convention. Now, what do? They've created this document. They were tasked with amending the Articles of Confederation, but they created a whole new government. So what's the next step? So that's where the 5th page comes in.
Okay.
So if we can go over to the 5th page, this is basically, I like to think of it as like a cover letter. It's been with the Constitution its whole history. It's on the same parchment. Jacob Challis wrote it as well. So this basically is a resolution that they passed. Giving instructions to the Confederation Congress, because we were still under the Articles of Confederation, how the states should ratify the Constitution, and then what happens when enough states have ratified it. And so it says that once 9 states have ratified the document, then it goes into effect in those states. And then Congress is supposed to organize the first election, the first electoral vote, and then the first Congress. It was because the 3/4.
The 3/4.
The 3/4, yeah.
Needed to do faster math.
In June 1788, 9 states had ratified it, and then by then, 11 states, the 11 states that were going to ratify it from the very beginning, ratified it in 1788. It wasn't until later that North Carolina and Rhode Island ratified it.
It's just the thought of the process, like the foresight to try to map out these details that were really about operations and procedures and process that I don't even think would even dawn on me if I was part of, setting up a government. Why did they have that knowledge or insight to be so specific about, not only are we going to have the Constitution, but by the way, here's the 5th page, and this is what's going to happen next?
I think they just experienced with the Articles of Confederation, so they just had set up another government that didn't work. So they knew, hadn't even been a decade. So they knew that what they needed to do to make this work. And one of the reasons that they set it up this way is because instead of having state legislatures ratify the document, they had state ratification conventions that were elected by the people, and they wanted the people to have more of a say in this document. So they were bringing the people along with them. So I think that's a lot of foresight to get more buy-in from people rather than just state legislatures deciding.
You mentioned the Articles of Confederation didn't really work. Why did they not work?
You required unanimous approval from every state, and they couldn't really raise money, and they were deeply in debt from the Revolutionary War. So basically, it all comes down to money.
Can I ask you something about the signatures over here one more time? I do. Wait, there was something here in particular. Yeah,
because I love this. Though I love Alexander Hamilton. I've loved him since before the musical, even. But so this is basically, the cover letter from the delegates to Congress, and it outlines all the states that signed the document. And it says, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and then Mr. Hamilton from New York, because he was the only delegate that signed it from New York. And I love it that he's on this document specifically called out.
Why did they decide to do that way, though?
Because New York technically hadn't, since he was only one
because he was
person,
only one,
his delegation didn't sign it. So New York technically didn't sign it, but he was, such involved in the process that, again, he signed it, he wanted to sign it. document. But also the other people who signed this document were George Washington in his capacity as president of the convention. And believe me, that says president. No one, his handwriting is very unique.
It is unique. I don't know if I would have recognized, I mean, Alexander Hamilton, you see very clearly, tight writing. George Washington, he has a little bit of flair.
Oh, he has a lot of flair.
Creative freedom.
Right. And then William Jackson also signed this document. So there's only 3 people really called out on this document, and it's Washington, Jackson, and Hamilton.
And Hamilton, who is a yes. And so maybe that was the early predictor that he would be brought out as a founder with his own musical someday on Broadway. It was already set in the Constitution. It's the penmanship I wanted to ask you about. And as I'm looking at the signatures, that's what I see here, that everyone has a different personality. But I can't imagine being that one person that's like, you know what, I'm going to sign my name bigger than anybody else, or I'm going to sign it in a, a very artistic way. So is there anything to take away from the way that the people's, the way that our founders signed it? Is there any sort of backstory to that? Or is this just, a bunch of guys signing relatively quick and getting on with their day?
I honestly think it's a bunch of guys signing relatively quickly and getting on. Well, think about it, they've been in Philadelphia
and it's hot
all summer.
And it's hot.
They don't have air conditioning. They have been away from their families. They probably want to go home. And if you look at them, they're all signed the same as, like, George Washington signs his name like that every time. It looks exactly the same every time. James Madison, it's the same every time. So yeah, some people are kind of bigger, but
yeah, I love this. Is that? I don't know the name here. I can't touch the window. I apologize. National Archive in Maryland. What's the big name there?
I can't even read that. Yeah.
Isn't it funny how there's some people that made it into the history books and the not just the history books, but just our public conversation, and then others, you're like, what's the backstory of that guy? He was important too. He signed the Constitution.
We have these murals here, and they depict the signing of the Declaration and the Constitution, and half of them, I'm like, I study this period, and half of them, I barely know who they are.
I was interested to hear about the artists, and I want to take a look at, and that he didn't have pictures. He didn't even have descriptions of the way that some of the founders looked. And he said that something to the effect that their mothers wouldn't even recognize them in the painting because he was just trying to do his best.
Back then too, there's no internet, so he's researching from a very small amount of material. So if these likenesses did exist, he didn't have access to them. So yes, some of them he does a really good job though, because I know Roger Sherman, he's behind Thomas Jefferson, who's the redhead. Every image I've seen of him looks exactly like that. He's over there creeping behind, in the end. So he did a good job with some people, but other people you're like, I don't know who that is.
It's a good reminder not to be caught with one gesture on your face, or one, look on your face, because you never know when you might make it into the history books that way. I just want to ask you quickly about the Declaration of Independence because of the condition of this original document. And the backstory to it is really interesting and maybe gives us some insight into why we store the documents this way.
Oh, exactly. Well, this is a perfect example. A lot of people have been coming up and saying, why don't you have the whole Constitution on display all the time?
Right.
The amendments. And this is a good example of why we don't do anything like that. And so this document, the Declaration this is the original Declaration of Independence. The text was passed on July 4th, 1776, but was actually signed August 2nd. And then it traveled with Congress as Congress traveled. Yes, this document traveled with Congress as they, during the Revolutionary War, when Congress met in New York, they went there, it went to Philadelphia, it came to D.C. During the War of 1812, it was evacuated. But the two major, damage, I guess, that when it had the most damage was in 1823. The State Department noticed it was already fading, and so they had exact replica of it made. And the process by creating that engraving plate, we believe that the engraver took a wet piece of paper and put it over it and pulled off the ink. And then he created the engraving plate. So what you think of as a declaration, they all emanate from that engraving plate. So a lot of the ink was damaged from there, but also then it was stored.
Do you think he realized the mistake, or was that just part of the process?
It was part of the process, and a lot of times these engravers were trying to get access to this document, and I don't know how many times they've touched it, or they weren't thinking of this document in preservation standards. Clearly there's handprints on it, there's fingerprints on it. They've taken the ink off it. It was displayed in the patent office across from a window. It was displayed, people, they were in rooms with fireplaces, people smoked. It was displayed outside, so it has a very rough history.
We think about everything behind a frame too, like not just, right? I mean,
you can see people's finger, and right here, actually, one point in time, somebody put their whole handprint on it, so you can see it. And there is
oh my gosh, you can see it right there.
So it wasn't, we would never, and so since we've gotten this document, we got it in 1952, no additional damage has happened to it. It's been in state-of-the-art cases ever since, but yeah, it definitely, you can't really read it. It's hard, it's almost impossible
it's
to read.
Actually, I felt so sad looking at it, knowing the importance of it, and obviously the importance of the Declaration of Independence is carried through all the different stories that happened since then. But you think, oh my gosh, this is the document. Think of the people that touched it and held it, and what they were thinking of at the time. And as a history nerd, I felt personally afflicted.
Yeah, it feels more like an object or an artifact than an actual document itself. Something that's physical to hold on to, but not something that you can read from.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the amendments then from here, because as we have the Constitution, the original part of the Constitution, and then we have how the Constitution has evolved.
Right. So we have the original 4 pages, and then we have the Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights has the first 10 amendments on it, and then it also has what would eventually become the 27th Amendment in 1992. It took 203 years for it to be ratified. So what we have on display here is the first part of the amendment process. This is when the Congress proposes the joint resolution to the states. So once 2/3 of Congress propose the resolution for the amendment, the states then have to ratify it. So we have all the other ones. So the Constitution has only been amended 27 times. The first 10 are on that document and the most recent. And so this not only shows you, this is not only our Constitution, the whole thing on display, it also shows you how record keeping happened and changed over the course of time. So you see these early, these are all in parchment, which is animal skin. All of our early laws are on big pieces of parchment. So that's reflected in this. So this is the 11th Amendment. This is the first non-Bill of Rights amendment. And it's, it's on parchment. It's sewn in at the top. It also looks very different. It's completely handwritten. Still signed. You can still see John Adams. So the joint resolutions are signed by the President of the Senate, which is the Vice President, and then the Speaker of the House. So you can see John Adams' signature on there. It's very, very hard to read this. There is a glare. But you can kind of see how they change over time.
Yeah, each one's a little bit different.
Right.
This one is particularly unique, the 13th Amendment.
Right.
With the penmanship.
Right. It's because this is the amendment that abolished slavery, and it was really important at that time, and a lot of people felt very strongly about it. And so all the clerks, if you look at all the other proposed amendments, not those are all printed, but these are all in the same person's handwriting. Every line is a different person's handwriting. It's a different clerk.
And so it was someone that was working as support to Congress?
Yes. So if you think about it, Congress, all the legislation for the first 100 and some years were handwritten. So they had all these essentially clerks that would write the legislation out. Because some of these, these are relatively short, but some are longer pieces of legislation are, dozens of pages. So they're just, writing. So this is all different. And the other interesting thing about this one is that there's no role for the president in the amending process, because 2/3 Congress is veto-proof anyway, so you don't need them. But Lincoln felt so strongly about this that he signed it himself. It's funny because he says approved February 1st, 1865, Abraham Lincoln, but if you look, the document is January 31st because his signature is like superfluous.
Because you don't really need a signature on it.
But when you're the president and, I do say, no, I'm sorry, Lincoln, you cannot sign this document. We just fought a war, like, yes.
But again, some insight and foresight from the people that were there, whether they were a clerk or a president, that they wanted to have a little bit of their hand on history, and they knew it in that.
Oh, they knew, and yeah, and that's very unique. And this will forever be confusing to me. These are known as the Civil War amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th. And you notice that the 15th and the 13th look exactly the same. And then the 14th is on this like random other kind of paper. So I don't know if they ran out of paper. We tried to figure this out because it's not even, it doesn't even have the nice head. It looks nothing like it. And it's right in between. So we're like, what?
what could seem like a significant historical story, but could be something very easy, like they ran out of paper.
Ran out of paper.
I did think this was interesting about the 19th Amendment being just, it looks so simple for something that was very significant to so many.
And it looks like all the other ones do, yeah. So this is actually our last one that's on parchment. It's just a regular joint resolution giving women the right to vote. We're actually putting this on display in the Rotunda next year. It will be on display all the time. We're getting a new case built for it, like a state-of-the-art case, like these cases. But yeah, it is. It looks just like, you know.
Something great. Like if I found that in a file cabinet somewhere, I might not think, oh, that's a momentous piece of paper that I'm going to need to save forever.
Right.
You know, it looks like very normal.
Well, and especially since this is what they look like today. So when we get a bill, you know, we would get legislation from Congress, because we still get them today, they look exactly like this. So it hasn't changed. I mean, in the, 125, I think we switched from like handwriting to printed around, 1898, 1899, and we've had it since. So all of them look the same.
That's it. Yeah, it's incredible to just stand here. I have two just final questions for you, because when I was here yesterday with all the other people that were visiting as a tourist, I was thinking of a movie scene with like Tom Cruise dropping from the ceiling, and just thinking, oh my gosh, all of these valuable documents are here in one place. Like, what is the security like for it? And how do we make sure nothing ever happens to any of this? Like, what is that like as a historian, just to think about? No state secrets are needed. No state secret. If you have Tom Cruise up there, you don't need to tell me. I'm just curious, like, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, it is funny because we have a vault, and we have a new vault. We got one about 25 years ago, but the previous vault, we literally had a working model of it on display. And so we would tell people how our security system worked. So after 9/11, we said, okay, we're gonna stop telling people, maybe you should keep it a secret, but we do have a vault. The charter documents go into their vault every night automatically. These are stored in another vault. So we brought them out of the vault, but for security for this exhibit, we always have, we brought extra guards on so we have our guards here, but we have 2 extra guards on call or on duty during the day when the people are here.
Now, before this was all arranged this way, it's my understanding, before the National Archive building even existed, or even before World War II, that some of these documents were sort of all around D.C. and then not necessarily in one place.
Right.
That made me feel a little bit better, because I feel slightly disorganized sometimes as a mom of 3. But was that like, what's the backstory to that?
So before the National Archives was created, individual agencies were maintained their own records, but the State Department was in custody of the acts of Congress, presidential proclamations, treaties, and amendments. The Library of Congress had the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And then when we were created, the State Department transferred all of the amendments to us, including the Bill of Rights. It wasn't until 1952 that we got the Declaration and the Constitution, because the Librarian of Congress didn't want to give them to us, even though we were created to store. So it was kind of this fight, and finally Congress and the President said, you have to give them to the archives.
Was it just like a personal thing? They just didn't want to let them go?
In the end, you get like a million visitors every year. It was like their most valuable documents. They didn't want to get rid of them. But these were pretty well preserved, but other records were in all sorts of crazy storage conditions that were not appropriate. And even Congress, we have pictures of some of the records of Congress that there's like water on the floor. There's, they're all just shoved on a shelf. They're not in any sort of order or boxes. So the record keeping was very suspect, and also subject to a lot of fires. So we lost a lot of records over the years with various fires. And so one of the reasons that we keep these, and we have our buildings fireproof, we have fire suppression systems, we have sprinklers, so we keep everything here. So
it's interesting because at the same time, you want to respect the past, and you want to love the artifacts and preserve them, and also realize that even without them, the nation continues, and it's built upon that foundation. I'm just curious your final thoughts on this. What do you think, as a historian, you've been around these documents a lot, but you probably have seen them online too, and a lot of people can see things online. We got artificial intelligence, we got all sorts of things, so someone doesn't have to come to Washington D.C. But there is a feeling when you're here by these documents. Why do you think it's important for Americans to see them in person?
I just think it's important to learn about your government and learn how we're all part of this government, and that's what we're here. We're here to save the records from history so people can learn from it. And that just coming here, so many people have said, I've never even thought about what the Constitution looked like. I couldn't even envision it. So people can at least think, okay, I know what the Constitution looks like. I know like my role in it, because these are really important to show, because even the Constitution, it's setting up our government. A lot of these gave people rights, and they feel very connected to them. So, the 19th Amendment, we feel connected to because that is why we can vote. A lot of these amendments are like that. So it's interesting, the 26th Amendment giving, 18-year-olds the right to vote. So it's more of a personal connection, I think, having these out than necessarily having the original Constitution, even though they're the same. Like, literally, this is the Constitution. The second that the states ratify it, this is the Constitution. They're not lesser because they're amendments. They're part of it, but we still think of them as amendments. But these at least are like the ones that touch us most closely.
Thank you for believing in quick, concise, nonpartisan, smarter news. Every time you join us or share or save our content, you help us build a solution in news, and we are so grateful. We have a few other ways you can support our mission, from joining our insider community scoop, to shopping our gear at our SmartHER shop, to just telling a friend. The best way to do any of this is to visit smarternews.com or follow us at SmartHER News on social media. Don't worry, we put all of this in the captions so it's easy for you. Plus, we added our email just in case you want to drop us a note. We always love hearing from you. Thank you for helping us deliver news smarter.